The name Randolph Turpin once sent shivers through the boxing world. He was a fighter built from hardship, a man who turned struggle into strength with every punch he threw. His story wasn't just about boxing, it was about survival, about proving that even when the odds are against him, there's always a way to fight back. His journey began in Leamington Spa, a town far removed from the roar of the boxing ring. His father, Lionel, had traveled across the ocean from British Guiana to fight in World War I. But the battlefield took more than it gave. A gas attack left him with lungs too weak to carry on, and within a year of Randolph's birth, he was gone. That left his mother, Beatrice, to raise 5 children alone. Life was never easy, but in hardship, Randolph found his edge. The hunger, the struggle, it all built something inside him. And when he stepped into the ring, it wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that he belonged, that he was more than just a kid from a hard upbringing. Little did the world know, this quiet boy from Leamington Spa would soon shock the greatest boxer alive. The punch that shook the world didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of hardship, from a boy who learned to fight long before he ever stepped into a ring. Randolph Turpin wasn't supposed to make it, not in life, not in boxing. But fighters don't wait for permission. They take what's theirs. Raised in Warwick, he was the youngest of 5, a boy whose childhood was shaped by struggle. His mother, Beatrice, did what she could, but war had left her as a widow, her hands rough from endless work as she cleaned houses to keep food on the table. At one point, she had to send 2 of her children away because there simply wasn't enough to go around. Life didn't make things easy for Randolph, either. He nearly drowned, suffered a burst eardrum that left him partially deaf, and barely survived pneumonia. But hardship has a way of building a fighter. Randolph's older brother, Dick, was already making a name for himself in the ring, and soon, Randolph followed. He started young, fighting for coins at traveling fairs with his brother Jackie. The crowd would toss money into the ring as the two put on a show, their fists telling a story louder than words ever could. From a Leamington Boys Club to the Royal Navy, his rise was fast. He lost his first amateur fight, but after that, he rarely tasted defeat. He racked up national titles, won both junior and senior ABA championships in the same year, something no one else had done before or since, and made history as the first black boxer to claim a senior ABA title. By the time he turned professional, he wasn't just another fighter. He was something different, something dangerous, and soon, the whole world would find out. The night Randolph Turpin stepped into the ring with Sugar Ray Robinson, the world expected a formality. The best fighter alive was supposed to put on a show, pick up another easy win, and head home. But boxing doesn't always follow the script. Sometimes, a fighter comes along who refuses to play his part. Turpin's journey to that moment was anything but smooth. He had turned professional under George Middleton, the same man who managed his brother Dick. His debut in 1946 was explosive. He stopped Gordon Griffiths in London and followed up with 14 more wins. But then came the setbacks. A draw with Mark Hard in 1947, 2 losses in 1948, including a punishing defeat to Gene Stock where he hit the canvas 4 times before retiring on his stool. Outside the ring, his personal life was unraveling. On the morning of the Stock fight, he had learned that his wife had been awarded custody of their son. His heart wasn't in the fight, and he told his brother Dick that he wouldn't be surprised if he lost. After that night, he took a step back, walking away from the ring for 5 months to try and put the pieces of his life together. When he returned, he was different. He built himself up under the guidance of Arthur Batty, embracing weight training at a time when most believed it would ruin a fighter. But Turpin proved them wrong. He came back stronger, more dangerous, packing knockout power in both hands. With his newfound strength, he tore through the middleweight ranks, avenging his past losses and capturing both the British and European middleweight titles. His brother Dick had already made history as the first non-white British champion, and now Randolph was carving his own path. Then came 1951. Sugar Ray Robinson, the seemingly invincible champion, arrived in London for what was expected to be a routine title defense. No one believed Turpin had a real chance. Robinson had lost just once in 132 fights, and he had avenged that defeat 5 times over. But fights aren't won on paper. And when the bell rang, Randolph Turpin wasn't there to be a stepping stone, he was there to change history. The fight against Don Cockle in 1952 was supposed to be another step forward. By the 11th round, Turpin had battered his way to victory, claiming the British and Commonwealth light heavyweight titles. Cockle, who would later stand toe-to-toe with Rocky Marciano, couldn't handle Turpin's strength. A year later, he reclaimed the European middleweight title, outpointing Charles Hummes. In Europe, he was recognized as world champion. But in America, the title meant little. The real world championship was vacant after Sugar Ray Robinson's retirement, and Turpin was given a chance to fight for it against Carl Bobo Olsen. Madison Square Garden, 1953. The night should have been his return to the top. He started strong, taking the first 3 rounds. But then, something changed. The energy drained from his body, and Olsen took over. By the 9th and 10th rounds, Turpin was on the canvas. When the final bell rang, his shot at the title was gone. Worse, he was urinating blood after the fight, a sign of the brutal body punishment Olsen had inflicted. That was the night everything shifted. Turpin was never quite the same again. He struggled to make the middleweight limit, and when he moved up in weight, his advantages faded. He was still powerful, but now he was fighting bigger men who could take his shots and hit just as hard in return. The losses started piling up. A brutal first-round stoppage to Tiberio Matri in 1954 exposed weaknesses he once covered with speed and reflexes. His right hand dropped too low, leaving him wide open for left hooks. His eyesight was failing too, his peripheral vision no longer sharp. The British Board of Boxing Control ordered medical tests but cleared him a fight. He kept going, moving up to light heavyweight, where he was no longer a real threat to the world title. In 1955, he beat Alex Buxton to win the British and Commonwealth titles again, but then came a crushing knockout loss to an unknown Canadian, Gordon Wallace. For knockdowns, retirement announced, but he couldn't stay away. In 1956, he returned, winning a couple of fights before dropping a decision in Germany. That same year, he beat Alex Buxton once more for the British title. Then came the final blow, not from a punch, but from the boxing authorities. The board blocked a proposed fight against Willie Pastrano, saying it wasn't in the best interests of the sport. The message was clear. They feared for his safety. Turpin had fought his way up from nothing. He had beaten the greatest boxer in the world. But now, the fight was slipping away, and this time he couldn't punch his way out. In 1958, Randolph Turpin stepped into the ring for what would be his final fight. He had once been a man who shocked the world, the man who beat Sugar Ray Robinson. But time had taken its toll. Across from him stood Yolanda Pompey, a dangerous light heavyweight contender. The fight started with a flash of the old Turpin. He floored Pompey in the first round. But instead of pressing the attack, he hesitated, offering a sportsmanlike tap of the gloves. It was a costly mistake. As the rounds passed, Pompey found his rhythm. Then in a sudden, brutal moment, a right hand caught Turpin clean on the side of the head. He hit the canvas flat on his back. For times, he tried to stand, each attempt more desperate than the last. But his legs wouldn't hold him. The referee counted him out. It should have been the signal to walk away, but the fight never really left him. In 1961, the British Board of Boxing Control refused to let him act as a sparring partner for Terry Downs, fearing the damage he had already taken. Still, he fought 2 more unlicensed bouts in 1963 and 1964. Knocking out both opponents' fighters who were making their pro debuts. It wasn't glory. It was a man clinging to the only thing he had ever known. Turpin's life had always been complicated, long before he ever became a champion. As a young man, he worked on building sites before joining the Royal Navy in 1945. Assigned to HMS Ganges, he was supposed to become a cook. His shipmates remembered his porridge cold and lumpy, as if he had no real interest in the job. And perhaps he didn't. Boxing was already calling him, and because of the pride his victories brought to the Navy, he was allowed to spend more time training than cooking. But his time in the Navy wasn't without trouble. That same year, he was charged with attempting suicide after a fight with his girlfriend, Mary Stack. He had swallowed liniment, a medical rub not meant to be ingested. It was a serious accusation at the time, since suicide was illegal. After an investigation, the charge was dropped, deemed an accident. Mary Stack later became his wife in 1947. The marriage was rocky from the start. They were young, immature, and full of distrust. Mary suspected him of cheating. He had a quick temper and a controlling nature. In 1948, she accused him of domestic violence, describing a brutal attack that included being hit with a broom handle and kicked in the stomach while pregnant. Turpin denied the worst of it, admitting only to slapping her after she swore at him. The charges were dismissed, but the marriage was doomed. They had a son, Randolph Jr., but the relationship never recovered. In 1953, they divorced, and Turpin became estranged from his child. America held both triumph and disgrace for him. In 1951, while training for his rematch with Robinson, he met Adele Daniels. He promised to marry her and bring her to England, but after returning home, he disappeared from her life. When he came back to the U.S. for his fight against Bobo Olson, they rekindled their relationship, but it ended in scandal. Daniels accused him of rape and assault. He was arrested and put on trial. Midway through the proceedings, she dropped the charges and settled for an out-of-court payment. Turpin insisted it was a setup, that she was retaliating for his broken promises. The incident drove a wedge between him and his brother, Dick, whom he accused of betraying his past to Daniels. By the 1960s, the former champion was a shadow of himself. The money was gone. The fame had faded. The sport that had made him a star no longer had a place for him. But boxing was never just a career for Turpin. It was the only thing that had ever truly been his. And now it was slipping away. Money slipped through his fingers as easily as a jab flicked off a glove. At his peak, Randolph Turpin had everything: fame, fortune, and the adoration of fans who still whispered his name long after his greatest night in the ring. But money, like boxing, is a game of control. And just like in his later fights, Turpin lost his grip. He lived fast, spent freely, and trusted too easily. The warnings came as manager tried to tell him boxing wouldn't last forever, that he needed to put something away for the future. But Turpin saw no reason to hold back. He was earning big, so why not enjoy it? Friends, family, and hangers-on came to him with stories of hardship, and he handed out cash without a second thought. If he wanted something, he bought it. When his manager had control of the finances, an accountant handled the books, and Turpin only withdrew money as needed. But after his second fight with Sugar Ray Robinson, he decided he wanted full control. It was a decision that would cost him dearly. His biggest mistake wasn't reckless spending, it was trusting the wrong man. After his second fight with Robinson, Turpin was paid in cash for his share of the film rights. He never declared it to the tax authorities, instead handing it to an associate for safekeeping. When he went to collect, the man refused to return it. Worse still, he reported Turpin to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. From that moment on, the tax office treated him as though he had been hiding earnings. They didn't just charge him for what he owed, they estimated what they believed he should have made, adding penalty after penalty. Every appeal he filed only seemed to make things worse. By the time they were finished, Turpin owed £100,000, the equivalent of millions today. The financial trouble ran alongside a personal life, just as chaotic. During his prime, Turpin had a reputation for being a ladies' man. He found himself named in a divorce case where a furious husband accused him of sleeping with his wife. But for all his flings, one woman stood out: Gwyneth Price, the daughter of a Welsh farmer. They met while he was training for the Robinson fight at GWRYCH Castle in Wales. In 1953, they married, settling into what seemed to be a more stable life. They had 4 daughters together: Gwyneth, Annette, Charmaine, and Carmen. Even in quieter moments, Turpin found ways to escape. He loved American comic books, spending his evenings flipping through them on the castle grounds. He also had a taste for poetry, perhaps an unexpected passion for a man who had built his name on brute force in the ring. But nothing could quiet the storm brewing in his finances. Turpin made one last desperate attempt to secure his future, buying the Great Orm's Head Hotel with his business partner, Leslie Saltz. His manager had warned him not to trust Saltz, but Turpin went ahead with the deal anyway. The business never turned a profit. By 1961, it was bleeding money, and he was forced to sell it at a loss. The sale came too late. Turpin was declared bankrupt shortly after. The man who once held the world in his fists now faced a final opponent he couldn't knock out. The taxman wasn't going away. The debts kept piling up. The world had moved on, leaving Turpin struggling to find a way forward. And as always, when he found himself in trouble, he turned back to boxing. It wasn't the punches that finally broke Randolph Turpin, it was the numbers. For years, he had been a force in the ring, a fighter who could take a shot and come back swinging. But outside of boxing, he was outmatched. The taxman didn't care how many blows he'd taken, how many bones had been bruised, or how his vision had started to fade from years of punishment. They only cared about the money, and Turpin couldn't explain where it had gone. He had never trusted banks, preferring to deal in cash, which left little to no record of his earnings or expenses. When the Inland Revenue came knocking, demanding back taxes, penalties, and interest, he argued that he hadn't even received some of the money they claimed he owed. But without receipts or records to prove it, his words carried no weight. The original tax bill was staggering, but his accountant, Max Mitchell, fought for him. In an emotional plea, Mitchell painted a grim picture of what boxing did to a man: the slow, inevitable decline, the damage that couldn't be undone. He argued that if businessmen were given tax breaks for wear and tear on their machinery, surely a fighter, whose very body was his tool, deserved the same consideration. The appeal worked. The debt was reduced to £17,126, but was still too much. By then, Turpin's assets had dwindled to just over £1,200. He was officially declared bankrupt in 1962, owing nearly £16,000. The man who had once earned hundreds of thousands in prize money was now ordered to pay just £2 a week toward clearing his debt. 3 years later, he was discharged from bankruptcy. But the damage to his pride was harder to shake. Desperate to keep going, Turpin bought a transport cafe in Leamington, though the building was already under threat of compulsory purchase by the council. Friends advised against it, but he pushed ahead anyway. Behind the counter, he hung a plaque that summed up his hard-learned lesson: that which seldom comes back to him who waits is the money he lends to his friends. But the cafe wasn't enough. Needing more income, he took up work in a scrapyard before making a surprising move. He became a wrestler. At first, promoters sold him as a spectacle, pitting him as the boxer versus the wrestler. Those early matches paid well over £100 a fight. But the novelty soon wore off, and Turpin was left with no choice but to wrestle for real. With only basic training from his friend George Kidd, he was out of his depth. He wasn't skilled, but his name still got him bookings. The money, however, wasn't what it used to be. He was soon making as little as £25 per match. The war took a toll. He suffered more injuries in wrestling than he ever did in boxing. His back, his legs, his joints battered from being thrown around the ring by opponents who had been doing this far longer than him. But he had no choice. He needed the money, and, as always, he spent it just as fast as he earned it. Even in the depths of financial ruin, he refused to let go of old habits. At his bankruptcy hearing, he admitted that nights out with his wrestling friends could cost up to £15, a huge amount given his situation. When the court's assistant receiver quipped, "You might be coming in here again then?" Turpin gave a small, defiant smile and replied, "No, sir, I don't think that is possible." But deep down, he must have known his fight with debt was far from over. 3 days before Randolph Turpin's death, the letter arrived: another demand from the taxman. £800. Money he didn't have. He had spent everything he'd earned from wrestling. The cafe, his last source of income, barely scraped by. Worse still, the council had decided to take the building as home, turning it into a car park. With no steady income, no savings, and nowhere to go, he was staring down the possibility of bankruptcy all over again. Turpin had spent years fighting battles outside the ring, but this one was different. There was no comeback, no second wind. The former world champion, once one of Britain's most celebrated athletes, was now a man drowning in debt, depression, and regret. Since leaving boxing, the joy had drained from his life. The sport that had made him famous had also left him broken. His doctor suspected he was punch drunk, the result of too many blows to the head. His memory had faded, his speech slowed, and his mood darkened. He was bitter about the taxes he claimed he shouldn't have paid, bitter about the money he'd lost, bitter that strangers still wanted to talk about his glory days when he wanted nothing more than to forget. Then, on May 17th, 1966, everything ended. He was found in the flat above his cafe, dead from gunshot wounds. The first bullet had lodged against his skull. The second struck his heart. Beside him, his 17-month-old daughter, Carmen, had also been shot twice. Miraculously, she survived. The inquest ruled his death a suicide. The story was that, In a moment of despair, he had turned the gun on himself after attempting to take his daughter with him. But his family never believed it. There were too many unanswered questions. A letter, typed 2 years before, hinted at something more sinister. Turpin had claimed people were trying to silence him because he knew too much. He wasn't afraid to die, he had written, but they had started threatening his wife and children. He named names, including boxing promoter Jack Solomon's, though there was no hard evidence to support his accusations. And there were other warning signs. He had been badly beaten by 4 men. At the time, he brushed it off, saying it was probably some angry wrestling fans. But was it? By the time of his death, Turpin was a man alone. His family had grown distant, not getting along with his wife, Gwyneth. In the last note he left, pinned to a door, he told her not to give anything to his brothers and sisters. He urged her to go back to Wales, the only place they had ever been truly happy. His tragic end mirrored that of another fallen champion. Less than a year earlier, Freddie Mills, Britain's other post-war boxing star, had died under mysterious circumstances. His death was also ruled a suicide. Some said he had been murdered by gangsters. For Turpin, the whispers of foul play never fully faded. But the truth, that, like so much of his fortune, may have been lost forever. They cheered for him once. Thousands packed stadiums, roaring his name, watching him climb through the ropes like a king stepping onto his throne. He had stunned the world, humbled a legend, and for one fleeting moment, he was the most celebrated man in Britain. But the cheers didn't last. They never do. By the end, the crowds were gone, the money had vanished, and the friends who once swarmed around him had disappeared. All that remained was a mountain of debt, a body battered from years of punishment, and a man who felt more forgotten with each passing day. Randolph Turpin had always been a fighter, but some battles can't be won. His death in 1966 left more questions than answers. The official story was suicide, a desperate act of a man drowning in financial ruin. But whispers of foul play never quite faded. He had spoken of threats, of men who wanted him silenced, of money that was stolen from him. A letter he had written 2 years before his death warned of danger, and a brutal beating by unknown attackers only added to the mystery. Yet, for all the speculation, time did what it always does: it moved on. Turpin, once the pride of British boxing, became a footnote in history. His story, once shouted from newspaper headlines, faded into silence. The man who had conquered Sugar Ray Robinson, who had inspired a nation, was left in the shadows. It wasn't until decades later that the world began to remember. In 2001, he was finally honored with a place in the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York. A statue now stands in Market Square, Warwick, a tribute to the man who, for a brief moment, stood atop the boxing world. Turpin had once tried to put his feelings into words, scribbling a poem after one of his comebacks. The final line spoke of a man who had seen too much, learned too late, and knew exactly how the world worked. Randolph Turpin had fought his last fight, but the echoes of his story, of his rise and fall, still linger.